Now that we talked about what social psychologists study, we want to talk a little bit about the how. And obviously, social psychologists use the main methods of psychology. We use experimental approaches, and we use correlation observational approaches. And you have learned mostly about that. You're in the process of learning about all of these techniques. So I don't think we need to review that. And you will see how experiments are done in the upcoming 9 lectures for sure. But there is something about some kind of key assumptions, almost in the ideology, that underlies the approach in social psychology that sets us apart from other disciplines. And I want to give you a bit of a feel for that. And when we go through each of the 9 upcoming topics, you will see that in action. But I want to kind of start by giving you a feel for how social psychology often does its research. So let's start with one problem, and that's commute. It's great if you're in a pandemic, you don't have to commute that much, but otherwise you have to commute a lot. And commuting is one of the biggest sources of misery for adult people. I think you have experiences, I have experiences. It's often a very unpleasant time, a time that feels wasted, a time that feels meaningless. So here's a large-scale study, and there are many studies that replicate this finding that show that holding all else equals, commuters have lower life satisfaction, lower sense that their daily activities are worthwhile, lower levels of happiness, and higher anxiety on average than non-commuters. Just commuting really contributes to our misery that we experience every day or every workday when we have to commute. So what can we do about it? As a engineer, you might feel like, wow, we have to make the commute shorter. So we have to invest billions of pounds, literally billions of pounds, to improve the speed. Maybe we can cut 10, 15 minutes off of the daily commute, and thereby we will help people. As a clinical psychologist, you might think like, oh my God, this is a toxic environment. We have to get people out there, and we have to restructure our whole working environment. As a social psychologist, you feel like, maybe there's something else we can do. And your first suspicion is that, okay, people are hypersocial. They're uber social animals. So how can we apply this to the situation? So our instinct would be, okay, what they have to do is they have to talk to their other commuters. They have to stop being in solitude. They have to stop feeling alone. They have to stop feeling lonely. Here's the study we talked about in the first part of our lecture, that loneliness is the biggest contributor to misery, and feeling social connected is the strongest contributor to our happiness. So what we have to do, and it's a very uniquely social psychological perspective, is we have to connect people to each other. That seems counterintuitive, right? Oh, commuters, they don't want to talk to me. Please, on the tube, everybody's just like staring down and thinking, please do not talk to me. Social psychologists think differently. So now we know what we want people to do. We want them to talk, okay? But there's something else that's kind of implicit here, and it's a situationist approach to understanding behavior. What we think of when we look at the situation is not so much of the person, or not so much how the brain processes information, or not so much how our biology is kind of equipped to handle the situation. What we think is there's a key behavior. We as social psychologists, there's a key behavior we want people to do. And if we change that behavior, if we change that situation, then people will be happier. And that's kind of like a situationist approach. This is often captured, I think, in a simplest form in Kurt Lewine's field theory. Kurt Lewine is often called the father of social psychology. We have a bit of history, as it is tradition in the introductory lecture. Kurt Lewine, the founding father of social psychology, super interesting person, lived in Berlin, my hometown, till the 1930s, but then had to leave Germany because of the rise of Hitler and immigrated into the US, where he kind of became the thriving force for psychology in general and social psychology in particular. In his his approach was very, very simple, right? He said behavior is a function of the environment. Here we would nowadays say behavior is a function of the situation. So if we change the situation, people will be, depending on how we change it, be happy or unhappy, will productive or unsuccessful. It doesn't matter who the person is. It doesn't matter how they are equipped. All we have to do is change the situation. Nowadays, people often have slightly more fancy equations to express that behavior as a function of the person and the environment, or most social psychologists now have a kind of an idea of more of behavior as a function of the person and the environment, plus a function of how the person interacts with the environment. But we come to that in the upcoming weeks. For now, just say behavior is a function of the situation, behavior is a function of the environment. So what does that mean? So here, basically what we're saying is, if people feel miserable, all we have to do is switch their behavior. We have to switch it from doing something solitary, lonely, having their headset on, watching Netflix, just being on their own, not talking, to something social. They should engage socially with their fellow commuters. And now all we have to do is change that situation, give them some incentive to do so, and then they will be happy. So this is an idea that Nick Apley and Schroeder tested in a study. So what they did is, it was in Chicago. In Chicago is a commuter city. They were in kind of a suburb, and there the commuters have to go on trains, just like in London, and then they kind of commute into Chicago for about an hour. And they wanted to change what people do during that hour. So on one condition, they told participants that were randomly recruited on the tracks. They got £5, I think a £5 Starbucks gift certificate if they participated in the study. We're instructed to do not talk with other people. Just do your own thing. Sit there like this person here on this icon with the headset. The other group, quickly, was instructed to make contact with their fellow commuters. It's like you have to approach and talk to somebody next, left, right, or in front of you. Try to have a conversation with somebody. Try to approach them. Okay? You get £5 for that, and people were willing to participate and give it a go for £5. And there's a third group, a control group, where they were not told anything. They were just like, do here, participate in the study, and just do during your commute what you normally do. Okay, classic control condition, no manipulation there. So what we can see here is that, let me just quickly activate my pointer, right? Here on the y-axis, what you can see is the happiness. So the higher the numbers, the happier, the more positive they rated afterwards their commute. And then you can see these three conditions: solitude, control, and connection. And what you can see here in the first study is that people in the connection condition were the happiest, right? And you can see this is like here, there's two studies summarized. In both of these conditions, the people who were connected to others, who talked to others during their commute, had the strongest happiness, reported the highest happiness. Okay, so you can see here in the first study, a little bit different in the second study, that people who were in solitude felt the least happiness. Okay, which is very much in line with ideas of social psychology. So changing the situation, changing the behavior, changed what people thought and felt during their commute, changed how they experienced. So this is often, you will have that in personality psychology in the second semester, called kind of upon this idea of like the person situation debate. There were on one side, there were people like Kurt Lewin, and here like Walter Mischel or Daniel Kahneman. I'll say something about them in a second, who said, all that matters is this situation. We do not have to care about the personality of people. I don't want to make the arguments for personality psychology, because personality psychology, you will get that taught in the second semester in the spring of next year, and this is a big topic there, so I don't want to defend them. I just kind of push the social agenda here as hard as I can. And Walter Mischel wrote a book where he kind of summarized the ideas of personality psychology. He's on the left, and he suggested that there is no real personality. People don't really have any traits that predict behavior. All that matters is the situation. Obviously, it's a little bit simplified, but he said, I can't find any reliable evidence that speaks against that. Okay. And I'll show you in a second a empirical idea why we think that matters. But for now, let me just say two things. Walter Mischel on the left, Daniel Kahneman on the right. Both of them are super important psychologists, two of the most important psychologists of the last 100 years. Walter Mischel just recently died, unfortunately. Both of them had to flee Europe, and because of the Nazis. Walter Mischel fled from Austria, Wien. I think Daniel Kahneman first immigrated to Paris and then fled to the US. A lot of founding fathers, he fled actually to Israel. A lot of founding fathers of social psychology were somehow threatened by Nazis and had to leave. And you can see in the second part of our module that a lot of these ideas that social psychologists had in the earliest were influenced by their history. That is, that they had to flee Nazi Germany. Okay. Back to the person situation debate. So what does that mean? It seems somewhat abstract, but look at the study, okay? So in our study, what Walter Mischel is saying is it doesn't matter who the person is. It doesn't matter whether they think they're extroverted or introverted, for instance, if they're talker or loners. No, all that matters is how they behave. And if they behave in a specific way, then they will experience the same things, thoughts, and feelings, okay? And what you can see here is, again, the same. This is what was tested in a study, right? So you can see that when you can see, okay, let me just kind of orient you. It's like on the y-axis, we again have the positivity. And when we just look at this picture here for now, you can see again that people who were instructed to connect were the happiest. People who were instructed to not connect were the loneliest, or were the unhappiest, right? The loneliest for sure, because they were told not to connect, but they were also had the least fun during their commute. But now this is here called talkers and loners, which means nothing else but extroverts and introverts. Beforehand, they were asked, extroverts and introverts, what do you think how you will feel? An extrovert's like, oh, I love that. That will be great. I will be so happy thereafter. And introverts felt that, oh my God, this is terrible. I will hate this so much. Yet if you look at the actual, right, at the actual experience, there was no differences between talkers and loners, no difference between extrovert and introverts. It is the behavior that mattered, not so much who did that. And that is the situationist approach at its most extreme, where it doesn't really matter what you think, like who you are. It only matters what you do or what you think in a situation, and that will impact your happiness and well-being. So that's important to keep in mind. There's another element so this is something that is important to keep in mind, and it's important that this is something that social psychologists do. We often simply manipulate the situation, do not care so much about who is in that situation. We believe changing the situation will change the behavior, and this will tell us about the social psychology underlying these behaviors. There's a final thing which we touched a little bit upon, but which is really important. There are two more things. One thing that's really important is that social psychologists think that you and I, we're kind of naive psychologists. We're trying to make sense of the world. Just as these commuters, they go in and they think like, I think I shouldn't talk to anyone. Everybody is staring on the floor. It seems like they have a clear preference for not talking. It seems like that nobody else is talking. I can see that the norm is not talking, so I should not talk. Okay. And it also maybe tells me something about my own preference. It seems like I don't like talking either. Nobody else likes talking. So commute is something where we don't like talking. Okay. So we build a theory, we build certain beliefs, and that's what guides our predictions and behaviors, right? I go into and think other people don't want to have a conversation with me, and I wouldn't enjoy that. So this is something you can also see in the results, something we just touched upon, right? So, before we come back to that, so we build kind of theories and we have beliefs and attitudes, right? So these theories we build about the world kind of feed into the beliefs we have, which then feed into kind of the thoughts and feelings we have in that situation and predict our behavior. So here I have this idea that people don't enjoy talking. I don't enjoy talking. Hence, what I do is I do not talk to other people, right? So how it's put in a study is we're social animals, yet We often seek social isolation. Do we mistakenly think that social isolation is more pleasant, right? And it comes a little bit back on to something we already saw, but I just want to repeat it because here we have this distinction on the x-axis between actual and predicted, right? Happiness. And what people experience actually was quite the opposite of what they predicted. A lot of people, most of the people, they're like, oh my God, if I talk to another person, that will be terrible. They also in a study, something I don't show here, just like the same pattern you can see here, right? In the second study where they replicated. The same kind of is true actually when they ask people how it felt to be approached. Did they think like, oh my God, what's that psychopath doing there? He's approaching me. He wants to talk to me. No, people were actually quite pleasantly surprised, and nobody did mind being approached and chat to. But you can see that we have certain wrong ideas about social interactions. We have some wrong beliefs and theories, but they guide our behavior. So sometimes when we kind of try to understand or manipulate people's behavior, yes, then we have to kind of approach and understand their lay theories about their own behavior. Okay, now kind of tying this back, there are two more points I want to make. All of these key behaviors are influenced by others. The theories we have, the beliefs and attitudes, the thoughts and feelings, our behavior in a situation, all of that is heavily influenced by the actual implied or imagined presence of others, the topic of social psychology. So all the key motivators for behavior are impacted by others. And that's kind of it's not just that we want to steer kind of increase social behavior, but the theories that guide our behavior, even if the situation has nothing to do with social interactions, are heavily impacted by the presence of others. Finally, and this is something obvious, but this is something that also really sets social psychology from other disciplines apart. This might be for you like, duh, obviously, we don't think that there's this kind of objective situation that people approach, but rather what we are really interested in, and I highlighted this here in red, is the perception of others, the perception we have about the situation. And these perceptions are driven again by our beliefs and by our theories. So beliefs and theory might be better placed over here, where they kind of feed into the way we then see the world, right? And the way we see others and the way we see situations. So social psychologists, if they want to change something, and it's very unique to others, we often try to change how people perceive the world. And we often think, okay, what we have to change is their theories and beliefs they have about the world. So why does this matter? I mean, obviously, you can think about here the example of like commuting, right? This research that I showed you sparked a real interest in London for a while. People started to wearing these badges, and kind of the badges would say, I want to talk, or something like that, talking aloud or so. They tried to start talking to lessen the misery of commuting, right? But if you're like a social psychologist and you have given 10 billions in order to increase the pleasantness of the commute, you might not spend all of that money to improve the train tracks to maybe cut 10 minutes off, but maybe you would do something more fun. You would kind of say, okay, I spend every year 100 million on inviting Hollywood stars into the train, and now they can have a fun communal chat with everyone and get everyone involved. So instead, or a pop star. So instead of having 10 less minutes and have people watch Netflix, you might think, you know what, I just invite Rihanna, or that's it, all my pop references are gone. You invite Rihanna and she is chatting with you during your commute, and you spend that money that way and not on improving the train tracks.